Touch my wife and you bury yourself. The cattle baron stared down 12 riders. I counted them from the ridge. 12. Spread loose the way men spread when they want you thinking about all of them at once and none of them in particular. 7 on the road, 2 cutting wide through the south pasture where the creek bends, 3 more coming up the back side of the hill behind the smokehouse. I'd seen that pattern before. Not here. Somewhere before this life, in a different kind of country, before I had anything worth taking. The field glass was warm from my hand. I'd been watching since before first light. Coburn had to be. Coburn or someone Coburn hired, which was the same thing. The man had been putting pressure on the valley ranches for 2 years, quiet pressure at first, the kind that comes through lawyers and water rights and cattle prices you can't argue with because there's no one to argue to. Then less quiet. The Hennessy place burned in February. Old Gus Prater found his well poisoned in March. Nobody said Coburn's name out loud because nobody wanted to wake up next to the ashes of everything they'd spent their life building. I said it, in the feed store in front of 6 men and the postmaster, said it plain and said it with my name attached. That was 3 weeks ago. Now there were 12 riders on my land before sunup. I came down off the ridge at a walk, not running. A man runs, they know they've got him moving before they've even arrived. I walked my horse down the back slope through the juniper, came around the long way and came up to my own front gate from the south like I'd been out checking fence, which I had been partly. You don't stop ranching because men are coming to kill you. The cattle still need water. The fence still needs checking. You do the work and you prepare for what's coming and you don't let the two things separate in your mind into the work that matters and the thing that doesn't. It all matters. That's the whole point. Ruth was on the porch when I came through the gate. She had the coffee pot in her hand and she was watching the road north, where the dust from 7 horses was starting to show above the tree line. Not panicking, just watching, cataloging. That's the word for it. Ruth catalogs. She sees a thing clearly, and she puts it in its place, and then she decides what to do about it. I tied my horse at the post and came up the steps. She handed me the coffee without looking away from the road. 7 on the road, she said. I heard the others, south pasture and behind the smokehouse. 12 total. She nodded once. Coburn doesn't want a conversation. No. She finally looked at me. Brown eyes that had been looking at me for 22 years and still found something worth looking at, or so I chose to believe. The Hennessy rifle is in the hall closet, she said. Tom left it when he moved his family to Flagstaff. I've had it cleaned. I hadn't known that. I looked at her a moment. I've had a month to think about this, she said. You've had a morning. That was Ruth. We built this place with our hands. Not a figure of speech. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest of it. My hands. Ruth's hands. We came out here in 1887 with a wagon, 2 horses, $40, and a land deed I'd won in a card game in Tucson that may or may not have been entirely legal. I've never looked too hard at that particular question. The land was good. The water was right. The grass came back every spring like it wanted to be here, which is all you can ask of grass. The first winter we lived in a dugout, half underground, dirt floor, a fireplace I built crooked that smoked badly for 2 years before I figured out the problem with the flue. Ruth never once complained about the smoke. She hung curtains in that hole in the ground. Actual curtains, white ones she'd brought from her mother's house, and she hung them over the one small window and kept them clean, and I used to look at those curtains some mornings and think, this woman is going to be all right no matter what. Whatever I fail to provide, she'll provide herself. She'll make something out of whatever I manage to give her, and she'll do it without making me feel the lack. That's a thing you can't manufacture in a person. Either they have it or they don't. We had bad years, you always do. Lost half the herd to a blizzard in '91. Lost a full season's calves to a sickness I couldn't name and the veterinarian couldn't either. Just watched them drop one by one over 6 weeks in the spring of '93. The bank in Prescott was patient with us once and impatient with us once, and both times I thought we might not make it through. Ruth worked the books at the schoolhouse for 2 years when the ranch was underwater. Didn't ask me about it. Just did it. Came home in the evenings and cooked dinner, and we'd sit on the porch after and look at what we had. This land that wanted to be here. And we didn't talk about the money because there wasn't anything useful to say about the money. The land was still there. The grass was still coming back. We were still here. By 1898, we had 2,000 head and the note paid off. By 1903, we had the main house built, proper lumber, a real fireplace that didn't smoke, 4 rooms and a wide porch that faces west so you can see the sunset clear across the valley. By 1908, we had the bunkhouse, the big barn, the south pasture fenced, water rights on the upper creek secured through a fight with the territorial government that cost me 11 months and more money than I like to remember. But we got them. You have to get the water rights. Without the water, you're just watching someone else's grass. I was 53 years old when Coburn started buying up the valley. I will tell you what I thought when I first heard his name. I thought, I have not come this far to give a single acre to a man who never shoveled a stall in his life. That's all I thought. It wasn't complicated. Some men get philosophical about threats. I don't. I see the thing clearly and I put it in its place, same as Ruth does, and then I decide what to do. What I decided was, hold the line. You hold the line. You don't give ground and you don't go looking for ground to give, and you make sure every man in the county knows where you stand. That last part matters more than people think. When Coburn's men started leaning on the Praters and the Hennessy's and the smaller operations along the creek, the men who went quiet thought they were protecting themselves. They weren't. They were telling Coburn something. They were telling him the price was negotiable. That's the one thing you can never do. The price is not negotiable. So I said his name in the feed store. I said, Coburn is running men off their land and we all know it, and I will not pretend otherwise to keep the peace, because the peace Coburn is offering isn't peace. It's just a slower kind of ruin. 6 men in that store, the postmaster. I looked at each of them. Nobody said anything. A couple of them nodded, small, the way men nod when they agree with something but aren't sure yet what agreeing is going to cost them. That was 3 weeks ago. Now the dust cloud on the north road was close enough that I could see the individual horses without the field glass. I went inside and got the rifle from the hall closet. It was a Winchester, a good one, and Ruth had oiled it right. The bolt worked smooth and the barrel was clean. I checked it the way you check a rifle when you expect to use it, which is thoroughly and without hurrying, because hurrying when you check a rifle is how you find out you've made a mistake at the worst possible moment. Ruth was in the kitchen. I could hear her moving, not frantic moving, deliberate. She was putting things somewhere, the good dishes, I thought, or the papers. There are papers you don't want burned. Deeds, water rights, the bank correspondence. She'd know which ones. I went back to the porch. The 7 on the road came through the gate first. They stopped about 40 yards from the porch steps and spread out in a loose line, well-mounted men, armed and not hiding it. The one in the center was big, running to fat around the middle but not soft, the kind of man who'd been hard once and still had the frame of it. Hat pulled low. He looked at me standing on the porch steps with the rifle in the crook of my arm, and he didn't look surprised. Coburn would have told him what he was coming to. Harlan Greer, the big man said. That's my name. Mr. Coburn wants to buy your ranch. Mr. Coburn knows where I stand on that. The big man tilted his head slightly. The 2 from the south pasture appeared at the south corner of the yard. The 3 from behind the smokehouse came around the east side of the barn. 12 men, positioned. He wanted me to count them. He was giving me a moment to count them. I already had. He's prepared to be generous, the big man said. He's prepared to be 12, I said. That's what he's prepared to be. A couple of them shifted in their saddles. The big man's expression didn't change. You're one man. I can count. He looked at me for a long moment. Whatever he was looking for, he was trying to find it in my face, some calculation happening, some adjustment to the odds, some recognizable moment of a man weighing his chances and finding them short. He was used to finding that. I expect most men he'd ridden up on had given him that moment. Even brave men give you that moment, the slight thing in the eyes that says they're afraid even if they're not going to run. I was not calculating the odds. I had already calculated the odds. I'd done it on the ridge at first light with a field glass and a cold head and 22 years of knowing that this land was mine and that some things you hold regardless of the arithmetic. A man who calculates the odds in the moment, when 12 horses are standing in his yard, has waited too long to decide who he is. I decided a long time ago. The screen door opened behind me. I did not turn around. I knew the sound of that door. I knew Ruth's step on the porch boards. She came up beside me and slightly behind my left shoulder, and she had the short-barreled shotgun we kept behind the woodbox, and she stood there and she didn't say a word. Just stood. The big man looked at her, looked back at me. I said, "Touch my wife and you bury yourself." Not loud, not a speech, just the plainest statement of the plainest fact I knew. The same way you tell a man the water rights are yours, or the north fence runs to the creek, or the calves drop in April. A thing that is simply true and requires no argument because arguing with it is not a real option anyone sane would consider. The yard was very quiet. The horses moved the way horses move, a small step, a toss of a head, and then were still again. I watched the big man and I watched the two on his flanks, and I held the rifle in the crook of my arm, not raised but ready, which is its own kind of message. There's a difference between a man with a rifle raised and a man with a rifle ready. Raised means he's already decided to shoot. Ready means he's decided he will shoot if he has to, which sounds like a lesser commitment but isn't. A man who shoots because he's decided to is firing from anger or from fear. A man who shoots because he has to is firing from somewhere colder and more certain, and 12 men on horses looking at that man generally know the difference. They knew. The big man looked at Ruth one more time, then at the rifle, then at my face. He said, "This isn't finished." I said, "Come back anytime." He turned his horse. The others turned. They went out the gate in ones and twos, not rushing, trying to preserve whatever dignity the exit allowed them. The 3 from behind the smokehouse went last. I watched them until the dust was thin on the north road, and then thin enough to see through, and then gone. Ruth didn't move until they were gone. Then she let out a slow breath, not a frightened breath, a held breath released. The breath you hold while a thing is uncertain and let go when it's resolved. She lowered the shotgun and rested it against the porch post. I put my hand on the back of her neck, just rested it there. Her skin was warm. She said quietly, "I wasn't sure about the shotgun. I thought, one more gun changes the arithmetic." "It did," I said. "You changed it." She turned and looked at me, those brown eyes. 22 years and some kind of tireless attention still in them, the kind that sees what's actually there rather than what it wants to see, and what it saw right now was me, standing on my own porch steps on my own land, and I don't know precisely what she read in my face, but whatever she read there was enough for her. She nodded once. She picked up the coffee pot she'd set on the railing. "It's gone cold," she said. "I'll make more." Coburn didn't send men back. Not to my place, not directly. I think what happened in that yard traveled the valley in a way that those things travel, not through words exactly, or not only through words, but through the particular silence that follows when 12 armed men turn around and ride out without having accomplished what they rode in to do. Men who hire themselves out to do that kind of work talk to each other. The story gets around. What a man said. What he didn't say. Whether his hands were steady. My hands were steady. I won't pretend I didn't think about that day many times in the weeks after. Not with fear, I was past fear by the time they rode in, but with something I don't have a clean word for. Some awareness of what had been at stake, the particular weight of having held something that mattered. The ranch, the water rights. 22 years of work in the fences and the grass and the faces of 2,000 head of cattle. All of it behind me while I stood at the gate. And Ruth. Always underneath every other thing, Ruth. There were men in that yard who looked at my wife the way some men look at things they mean to take. Not with lust exactly, or not only that, but with that particular rancher's appraisal, the calculation of assets. She was a woman on a prosperous ranch, and Coburn would have had a use for that. A wife you move off or dispossess, or simply frighten badly enough that she becomes a tool for leverage. Those men understood leverage. They did not understand Ruth. She'd been on this land as long as I had. She'd helped dig the foundation of the main house with a pick and a shovel. She'd set fence posts in the south pasture in August heat that would wilt a young man. She delivered calves at 3 in the morning in winters cold enough to crack the water barrel, and she'd done it without being asked and without requiring acknowledgement, because she didn't do things for acknowledgement. She did them because they were her land too, her ranch, her life's work as much as mine. When she came through that screen door with the shotgun and stood at my left shoulder, she wasn't doing it for me. She wasn't doing it because a wife stands by her husband. She was doing it because no one was taking what was hers. That distinction matters to me. It mattered to me that morning, and it matters now. There's a kind of man who thinks of his wife as something he protects, the way you protect livestock or silver or a deed locked in a box. He's doing the protecting and she's the thing protected. That's not what we were. We were two people who had built the same thing from the same dirt and who would stand or fall together because neither of us had any interest in the other version. The version where one of us runs and one of us holds. That's not a life we'd have recognized. I told the sheriff in Prescott what had happened, told him the names of the men I'd recognized and the direction they rode. He wrote it down. He looked at me across his desk with the particular expression of a man who is going to do the required minimum and hopes you understand why. I understood why. Coburn had money in this county. That money had a long reach. I've written it down, the sheriff said. Good, I said. You'll want to have it written down for the record. He knew what I meant. I was telling him there would be a record, that whatever happened next, there would be a name attached to it and a date. Men who operate in darkness prefer there to be no record. I was making one. I don't know what the sheriff did with the information. What I know is that Coburn shifted his methods. The overt pressure, the hired riders, the threats, the rough arithmetic of 12 men in a yard, that stopped. What continued was the legal kind of pressure. The water rights challenges, the grazing disputes, the county assessments that seemed always to find new reason to reassess. The kind of pressure that grinds a man down over years if he lets it. I did not let it. Ruth hired a lawyer in Tucson. I thought we couldn't afford a lawyer in Tucson, and she showed me the books, and it turned out we could, barely, if we were careful. She'd been planning for that possibility since February, since the Hennessy place burned. Squirreling money into a separate account. Not hiding it from me, she'd have told me if I'd asked. But I hadn't asked because I hadn't wanted to think about needing a lawyer in Tucson. Ruth thought about it because Ruth thinks about things I don't think about, the way I think about things she doesn't. That's how a life built together actually works. The lawyer's name was Estelle Vickers. 40 years old, sharp as a new blade, had beaten the territorial government twice over water rights in the last decade. She read every document we had, spread across the dining room table over 2 days, and she said, "Mr. Coburn is going to find the next few years very expensive." She was right, she was very right. That was 4 years ago. Coburn sold off his Valley holdings in 1911, didn't get what he paid for them and knew he wouldn't. He moved his operation east into New Mexico, and I heard he ran into trouble there too, different trouble, different men. But that's his story, not mine. My story is this. This porch this evening. The sun going down behind the mountains the way it goes down here, slow and red, painting the whole west face of the valley in something you'd call beautiful if you were the kind of man who used that word for landscapes, which I generally am not. But I'm using it now because I'm old enough to say what I see. Ruth is inside. I can hear her in the kitchen. The particular sound of her in a kitchen, the cadence of it, where she sets things down, how she moves from the stove to the counter, is as known to me as my own breathing, more known maybe, because you stop hearing your own breathing and you never stop hearing the person who's kept you company for 30 years. 30 years this September. I built this porch so the sunset comes at it straight. Not by accident. I oriented the house for exactly that reason, the one luxury I allowed myself in the building of it. A porch that faces the right direction. We sit out here most evenings when the weather allows, in the 2 chairs I made from lumber left over from the barn, and we watch the light change on the valley, and sometimes we talk and sometimes we don't. She comes out now with 2 cups and she hands me mine, and she sits in her chair, and she looks at the sunset, and she doesn't say anything for a while. I look at her profile. The gray at her temples that's been there since her 40s. The particular set of her jaw that I have spent 30 years learning to read, not because she's complicated, but because she's precise, and precision takes time to read right. She is at ease. That's what I read. She is a woman at ease on her own land in the evening with the man she chose to stay with, and that ease, the complete absence of any wish that anything were different, is the most valuable thing I have ever been given. I think about the morning 12 men rode into this yard. I think about standing at the gate with the rifle in the crook of my arm and the ground solid under my boots, and not one atom of my intention wavering, because the intention was correct, and I knew it was correct in the way you know things you've built your life on. This land is mine. This woman is my wife. There is a line, and I have drawn it, and any man who crosses it will find out immediately and permanently who I am. I held everything that morning. I held it, and it's still here, and she's still here, and the sun is going down over the valley we built, and the cattle are in the south pasture where I can just see the dark shapes of them moving slow through the grass, and the grass is good this year, better than last year, coming up thick along the creek where we cleared the brush in March. She puts her hand on my arm. Just rests it there, the way I rested mine on the back of her neck that morning after the riders left. She says, "The Delancey boy came by while you were in the south pasture, wants to lease the north grazing again next season." Same rate. I told him 10% more. He didn't argue. I nod. She takes her hand back and wraps it around her cup. The sun finds the last of the mountains and holds there for a moment, the way it does, balanced, steady, not going anywhere yet, and then it goes. The valley fills up with that particular blue you get after. I drink my coffee. It's good coffee. She makes good coffee. We sit.